2 o'clock, so maybe we can get started. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate the last day of the conference can be a little bit tricky coming along to these sessions, but for this session we're talking about problematic waste, and we've got 4 great speakers that are in their own right doing some amazing work in this space. My name is Spiro Callis from EcoCycle, for those who don't know me, and obviously we know firsthand some of the challenges that come with collecting and transporting a range of problematic waste. Each speaker, we've got 15 to 20 minutes, and just conscious of timing with buses and flights this afternoon. I think what we'll do is we'll have questions after each speaker from the floor, and then obviously maybe some closing questions right at the end of the session. So I'll give you each of the speakers a minute notice before your time is up, and then we can open to questions from the floor. So to kick us off, our first speaker is Zach Otton from the New South Wales EPA. Certainly a very popular department during this conference, and at the forefront of dealing certainly with batteries as one of the problem waste. Zach is the manager in the circular economy branch at the New South Wales EPA, a highly accomplished leader with extensive experience in driving policy. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all still being here today. It's 3 o'clock on the last day. Surprised everyone's hung in. So yeah, I am a manager in the policy branch, circular economy policy branch of the New South Wales EPA. Here to talk to you today about batteries. I was sort of the policy lead for the Product Lifecycle Responsibility Act, which went through Parliament in March. So I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting today, pay my respects to elders past and present, and also I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people in the room today. So presentation, I will look at, I'll just give you an overview. We recognise the growing challenges with battery-related fires in the waste and resource recovery industry. It's estimated there's 10,000 to 12,000 fires a year in waste and resource recovery facilities. As a result, the New South Wales government acted and enacted the Product Lifecycle Responsibility Act. While there are many benefits to batteries, it's critically important that we address the challenges in the sector so we can enable a safe circular economy. My presentation will focus on 3 main areas. I'll set the scene and outline why we must act, provide an overview of the opportunities and challenges with the growing number of batteries in our society. I'll discuss the impacts of battery-related fires. I'll highlight the existing voluntary product stewardship arrangements for batteries and the need to transition to mandatory product stewardship. So we've heard a lot in the last couple of days about product stewardship, voluntary. I think there's a real case for why we need mandatory. I'll outline what has been achieved so far, provide an overview of the recent legislative reforms that I spoke about that strengthen and expand the tools for product stewardship. I'll talk about some of the other important work happening across the EPA and other New South Wales government agencies, and with other New South Wales government agencies to address the challenges with batteries. And then thirdly, I'll outline the next steps for battery product stewardship. The act that we've passed is a giant regulation-making framework. It doesn't initially make any mandates on anything. It requires us to make regulations for individual products. So I'll discuss some of the key considerations of this work moving forward, including the importance of collaborating with other governments to achieve national alignment. So, rapid change for batteries. Batteries are going to play an increasingly important part of a circular and net zero economy. It's difficult to believe just how fast battery technologies have changed. Everyone in the room will have at least one, if not more, batteries in their pockets. I think about this a lot, having done this work the last couple of months. Right now I have 2 phones in my pockets, a watch. In my bag there is an electric shaver, an electric toothbrush. They all have embedded batteries. the majority of them can't be removed easily. It's a significant challenge in our society, the sheer number of batteries that are in everything. They're in our, yeah. I also have a laptop too, I forgot about that one. We wear batteries in smart devices. They're everywhere. This rapid change is presenting challenges. People don't often perceive the items that they're carrying as having a battery. They just think of them as the item. Lithium-ion batteries have particular benefits due to their high energy density, but if these batteries are not designed well, or they're not handled and disposed of properly, or they're not charged properly, they risk causing devastating fires. I think the presentation yesterday in the batteries panel was a really good illustration of some of those examples of what happens with battery fires. I've seen some pretty full-on videos. In London, they actually just recently banned e-micromobility in the tube after they had a fire from somebody walking an e-bike into one. And so now those devices aren't allowed on the London tube. We need to grapple with how to safely collect and recycle all these batteries and the devices that contain them once they reach end of life. So the impacts of battery fires. The risks and impacts of battery-related fires will not surprise most of you in the room or in the waste and resource recovery sector. A survey of the industry last year conducted by ACOR and WACRA revealed an estimated 10 to 12,000 battery-related fires across the waste and resource recovery sector. Fire and Rescue New South Wales in our state report that lithium-ion batteries are the fastest growing fire risk in New South Wales. In the last 2 years, the amount of battery-related fires has almost doubled. A lot of those are e-bikes entering thermal runaway. They're very hard to put out. Tragically, battery fires are also claiming lives in New South Wales. A Western Sydney resident lost their life in February from a suspected e-bike battery fire. The factors contributing to battery fires are complex. We have heard of the poor and variable battery quality, especially from some devices purchased from overseas-based online marketplaces. We also know that overcharging and damaged batteries are more at risk of igniting. Most relevant to the waste and resource recovery sector, we know that improperly disposed of batteries pose risk of fires in trucks and at waste and resource recovery facilities. The compounding impacts of these fires are significant. Insurance is becoming more and more expensive, if not impossible in some cases, and fire risks threaten the lives of workers and critical infrastructure, as occurred with the severe damage to Canberra's MRF back in December 2022. So what needs to be done to address the risk of battery fires while also supporting a safe circular economy? There isn't really one fix, but there is some important work being done across government. A core focus is ensuring that we have effective product stewardship for batteries. So the current voluntary product stewardship recovers about approximately 16% of batteries. Product stewardship is important because it ensures that suppliers of a product have a responsibility to reduce the potential harm of what they supply. Most of you will be familiar with, as I said, B-Cycle, the voluntary product stewardship. There's also Mobile Muster for mobile phones. While we acknowledge the good work of the voluntary product stewardship programs, they can only achieve so much. A key challenge for voluntary schemes is free riding. Free riding is a concept where batteries are being collected by the product stewardship schemes, but those people responsible for making those products aren't paying into the scheme. So Unfortunately, some businesses choose not to participate, but still benefit from the scheme. Mandatory product stewardship creates a level playing field. We know that mandatory product stewardship can be effective, as evidenced by the performance of New South Wales's container deposit scheme. The panel this morning on product stewardship, I think, highlighted a lot of these things that I'm talking about. A robust regulatory framework can ensure a level playing field for mandatory product stewardship. It can also drive continuous improvement and greater stakeholder confidence in schemes. So before I continue discussing the sort of work we're doing with legislation, I want to note some of the important complementary actions taking place to reduce fire risks and boost safe battery collection. For 21 years, we've been collecting and recycling batteries from New South Wales residents, initially at household chemical clean-out events and later at community recycling centres. Late last year, the EPA commenced a trial at 21 community recycling centres across New South Wales to accept embedded batteries. This is to ensure that communities across the state have access to safe collection points for devices that can be difficult to dispose of. We've been running communication campaigns to inform the community about safe battery disposal. And earlier this year, New South Wales Fair Trading designated e-bikes, e-scooters, e-skateboards, hoverboards, and the lithium-ion batteries used to power them as declared electrical articles under the Gas and Electricity Community Safety Act. This gives them regulatory powers to influence the design of those devices. This means that New South Wales Fair Trading can now regulate these items. Over the next 12 to 18 months, Fair Trading will be developing design standards, testing and certification requirements to ensure that these battery-powered modes of transport are safe. Fire and Rescue New South Wales have informed us that e-bike batteries and consumer electronic batteries are at the highest risk of those battery-related fires. It's an important step forward to reducing the real risks that battery-powered modes of transport pose to people across New South Wales. The path to mandatory product stewardship. So turning back to product stewardship, as some of you may be aware, the Environment Ministers meeting in June of last year, ministers acknowledged the critical importance of acting quickly to reduce the risks of battery-related fires. As a result of that meeting, New South Wales was asked to take the lead, and we, the Minister, pledged to introduce legislation in 2025. There was a draft regulatory impact statement prepared as part of that to acknowledge the regulatory impacts. The draft regulatory impact statement identified a number of things which we addressed as part of the legislation. So legislative reform. As I said earlier, we drafted legislation, and that legislation was debated in March of this year and passed Parliament unanimously in March. That is something unique in my public sector career. We had 16 people speak in support from all sides of politics, and there was no opposition to the bill. The Act establishes a legislative framework to be able to easily and quickly regulate products causing problems. We've drafted this Act to be able to regulate any product. We talked extensively about batteries, and that was the initial purpose of drafting, but the Act has been designed to, if there is a product causing problems, to be able to regulate that product. It is a large regulation-making framework. Right now, it doesn't do anything. It requires us to make a regulation for a particular product and then impose requirements on those products. In the first instance, as I've spoken about, it's intended to be used for the regulation of product stewardship for batteries. This Act will enable the New South Wales Government to take comprehensive action and escalate its response to reduce the likelihood and prevalence of battery fires in the waste supply chain. We know that this will prevent further deaths, injuries and property damage. The Act can target the entire life cycle of a product, from design all the way through to disposal or recycling. It can set recycling targets, it can set recovery rates, it can change those things over time as well. It allows for a range of different options, from a more base level of mandatory product stewardship where the obligations are on brand owners. It can also allow the government to enter an agreement with a product stewardship organisation, similar to the CDS style scheme. There is a range of different levers that the Act can be used for. So the other important feature to note is that the Act has been drafted as standalone legislation. That's been said a few times. What that means in effect is that we haven't relied on any other legislative instruments in New South Wales. So in effect, that means that this legislation could be used in other jurisdictions where it doesn't rely on them having the same legislation as New South Wales has. We're not sitting it underneath another Act within New South Wales. It's been intentionally standalone. The purpose of that is because we want to harmonise that approach across states. Ideally, I think the Minister has expressed in speeches that a national approach would make this probably simpler, but in the absence of action, we need to act. due to the pressing concern in New South Wales. We have been in conversation with other jurisdictions around the country. We want other jurisdictions to adopt this legislation. We want a harmonised approach. Standardising the approach across states will allow for it will be important for providing consistency nationally while also ensuring we have appropriate protections in place. So now that the Product Lifecycle Responsibility Act is law, the next step of the process for us is draft regulations. The Act has a mandatory consultation part when we make regulations, so we will do targeted consultation while drafting, and then the regulation will also have to be publicly consulted on. So the public, industry, everybody will get to have a say. This allows the government to act urgently to address battery fires and reduce free riders in the current system. Key elements of the regulation will be defining the scope of target batteries. The Minister has publicly said that the initial focus will be batteries in consumer electronics and e-micromobility, which is some of the sources of those fires. So it's the smaller batteries that are ending up in waste facilities. And then it's been publicly expressed that a future tranche down the track might involve larger batteries, such as in the home and EVs. We're in the process of drafting regulations and look forward to providing more information about the design, scope and timing of these in the future. I've said this previously in the other talk I did on FOGO, but I'm always open to talking to anybody about these things, answering questions. If you want to ask me a question at the end of this, that's fine, but if you don't get an opportunity to ask a question and there's something you want to know more information about, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to provide information about the process, the Act itself, what it does, and the approach we're taking moving forward. But thank you very much.
Zach, maybe take a couple of questions from the floor, and if you'd just like to introduce yourself and where you're from, and ask Zach some questions.
I just want to ask you a question. What agency is responsible for compliance with this new legislation, and what enforcement tools and powers you have built into the legislation to enforce it?
Yep, so there are a range of elements within the Act for enforcement. The EPA would be the enforcement for it. There's a range of cost recovery elements to it, so the idea being that the scheme and the administration of it would be cost neutral for government, which is the sort of best practice for how we design regulations now. In terms of, there's fines for non-compliance in there. There is a concept of an action plan, which is where a brand owner or a product stewardship organisation can be compelled to meet certain targets, and failure to comply with their action plan for how they meet those targets is also an offence. So there is a number of tools in there to ensure compliance.
Thanks, Zach. Alexander Mays Circle. So I was just wondering, I think you sort of said it towards the end, but I know the federal government's planning on a household batteries incentives, so heaps of houses are going to have large, heavy batteries. Will that be falling under this? And I think, yeah, managing it nationally is going to be a challenge, especially with the freight component. So.
Yeah. It's not our first, in the scope of our first tranche of regulations. We're looking to target the things that are causing fires. It's certainly on our agenda because, yes, we also recognise that in a couple of years there is going to be a heap of batteries hitting end of life that we're going to have to think about differently. It's a different kind of collection pathway to what we're doing at the moment, so it's sort of a different focus than at the minute, but it's certainly something that we're considering moving forward.
Sandra Thomas, Battery Stewardship Council. You mentioned the regulatory impact statement. I was just wondering if that will be made public at any point in time.
A regulatory impact statement for our regulation will definitely be made public. That regulatory impact statement was developed in partnership with a number of states to inform that Environment Ministers meeting. Whether that gets made public is a joint decision of multiple governments, so I can't say that to you at the moment. But certainly when we make a regulation, we have to make a regulatory impact statement, so there'll be a separate RIS made for that purpose, and that will be made public as part of the consultation. That's the standard process. No worries.
Certainly important work that New South Wales EPA is doing and long overdue. And I guess as an industry, we've been dealing with these challenges for a long time, so definitely well overdue. I'd like to welcome our next speaker. Alexander May is I've got you down as the technical manager, is that correct? Yeah, from Sercel. And he can take us through some of the great work he's doing around solar panel recycling.
Thanks, Barry. My name is Alexander May, and I'm the technical manager with Circle. So we're an Australian-owned and operated green technology business, and today I'm going to speak with you about our experience in recycling e-waste and specifically solar panels, and within that, the broad waste category of e-waste. So we'll be looking at the problems and the challenges, but also the huge opportunities that we face. So Circle is a green technology company, and we're solving the rapidly escalating global e-waste crisis here in Australia. With our world-leading end-to-end process, we're able to divert up to 100%, depending on the product, of end-of-life electronics away from landfill and extracting the source materials within those, such as the valuable metals that should be reused and drawn back into the circular economy. E-waste means everything from that has a plug and battery, from consumer items such as telephones, civic infrastructure, through to solar panels, everything in between. Over the last 8 years, Circle have pioneered a unique process that is ethical, it's sustainable, benefits both our business, the communities around us, and the planet. We traverse between the waste sector, manufacturing, mining, pulling all these concepts together to be in our own category of one. And within that, we see we're different to our competitors and the way that they act, and look at that, which brings its own equal opportunities. And I want to share these with you today. So last year we commissioned a new solar panel processing plant in Parkes, New South Wales, and this was made possible thanks to the funding from the New South Wales EPA with their Circular Solar Phase 2 grants program. And Australia currently, it's facing a tidal wave of end-of-life solar panels. It's really starting this year with a lot of the funded panels that have been put on 15 years ago. It's really starting to drive up the amount that we're seeing. So I've got a quick video here that'll give you an understanding of what we're doing at our Parkes site, where we've installed the primary capabilities that we have.
Circle has launched a world-class solar panel recycling facility to give end-of-life solar panels a new future. Located in Parkes, New South Wales, our new facility is the only one of its kind in the Southern Hemisphere. We're achieving market-leading recovery rates of valuable materials. We deframe, delaminate and process each panel with our world-leading technology. We recover valuable materials that are redirected back into the circular economy. These recycled materials can find a new life in manufacturing, construction and community infrastructure. Circle. Better for business, better for community and the planet.
So I wanted to share that with you just so you could understand how that equipment works, bringing a nice piece of glass and the cell sheets. So Circle, we see that we're perfectly positioned to manage the pending influx of solar panels and e-waste, thanks to our unique process and equipment and our national scale, having facilities all across the country, primarily on the east coast. And currently we've got 4 locations which have mechanical recycling equipment with a diversion rate of up to 100% from landfill, depending on what's going through there. So we're really driving that link between the product and moving the materials back into the circular economy with that approach. We've built a team of experts and bringing together different industries to really excel in what we're doing with that. About 12 months ago, there was only one location on this map, and as you can see, we've really expanded that and addressed some of the challenges with e-waste and solar panels in doing so, in having multiple facilities. So I wanted to touch on the e-waste problem that we are facing, and that's generation statistics which should blow your mind. So 22 kilograms per person will be produced this year in Australia, and by 2030 that's 657,000 tonnes per year. So for solar panels, what does that look like? This year we're looking at 2 million end-of-life solar panels, and currently there's about 120 million solar panels installed in Australia alone. So 2 million solar panels come end of life this year, that's about 40,000 tonnes. By 2030, we're expecting that to be 90,000 tonnes. So huge amounts of rapid increase over that time, and it's just exponentially growing. So we are the largest e-waste processor by capability in Australia, and one of our locations can do 20,000 tonnes per annum. However, if we're operating at full capacity at each of our 4 processing sites, that's only 80,000 tonnes, or just over 10% of the problem that we can fulfil. But what about solar panels and that waste stream? So at our solar panel recycling facility in Parkes, that processing line that you just saw can do 1 panel per minute. And that's about 10,000 panels per month, or 2,500 tonnes per year. So when you crunch the numbers, Australia's producing 13,500 panels per day this year. So it's huge amounts that we can't even meet, and we're only going to be doing about 6%. If we stay with our current capability, then by 2030, that's only 2.5% of the end-of-life panels. So currently, what's happening with the rest of them? More than 50% of Australia's e-waste ends up in landfill, and of the 46% that is sent for recycling, the federal government reports that's less than a third that is adequately recycled. The statistics for solar panels are far worse, with only 15% of solar panels being recycled. Of the 300,000 of the 2 million are recycled adequately. We've got the word recycled in parentheses because that really is recycling, of what people call it when they're pulling off the aluminium frame and ditching the rest into landfill. We don't see that as recycling. It's not responsible, and it's a cherry-picked figure. So what we are about is ensuring that as much of the materials are returned to the highest value as possible. And pulling off the aluminium frames, it's quite easy to do, and so there's a number of players in Australia and overseas that will do this because they can achieve up to 45% of the value just by pulling off the aluminium. So it's a real easy way to drive and get that value out of the product. And the rest just being landfill. So the other components to solar panels is that they do have silver in them, they do have copper, but you can only really get access and attractive value out of those is once you remove that glass. And that's part of what that equipment at Parkes does so well, in removing that glass, creating a cell sheet that has a high silver content. So Circle's commitment to simply be better, it drives us to find solutions to these challenges. Our impact in recycling is not just diverting from landfill, but in reducing mining of metals like copper, aluminium, silver, which all face forecast shortages in the not too distant future. And by recycling, we know that we're providing green materials, and these significantly reduce the carbon emissions compared to primary production activities such as mining. We call ourselves a green technology company, and what that means is we act and think like one. Recycling, it's part of what we do, and recycling solar panels, it's our expertise and specialisation. And our commitment to that goes broader. We're trying to reshape the sector in terms of the reporting components, ensuring that there's transparency, and truly leading that circular economy approach from products through to materials for manufacturing. So as you saw in that video, our hot knife separation equipment, which is installed at parks, and what it actually does is it uses a hot knife basically to peel away the back sheet of the solar panels after it's been deframed, which gives us a really clean aluminium, gives us a clean fraction of glass and the cell sheet, which means that we can recycle up to more than 90% of the value of the solar panels. And that equipment, it's the only one in the southern hemisphere, and the component about it is that it can only do monofacial undamaged solar panels. So here's a solar panel, it's monofacial, it's got glass just on one side. That machine can process it as long as it's not cracked. So with that, we try to get the message across to our customers that please ensure that you don't damage the panels, don't drop them off roofs, handle them with care, because it means a lot more to us because we can get a better recycling outcome. And for that, we offer a discount on undamaged panels as opposed to damaged panels. There's also bifacial panels, which have glass on both sides, and they are also a different challenge in themselves. So what we do with the damaged and the bifacial panels is currently we have a shred and screen process, shredding them down to this, sending them for smelting refining processes so that they can still recover the copper and silver. With that, we do provide a glassy mix, which can then go into construction materials like road base. But we know that that's not the best solution, it's downcycling. We would love to get solutions that bring all components of the solar panel, or as much as possible, back to that high quality, high purity materials that really elevates the value. So in the last 4 years, bifacials, they've really expanded presence in the market. They're more than 50% of sales in Australia now, and they were only introduced in the last 5 years. So you can see that there's a huge expansion on them. Currently, we are seeing primarily the monofacials come through, but that's quickly going to change, and we're going to have answers for both these challenges. We've looked at processes such as grinding. Grinding is suitable for the monofacials where you can take the thick glass off, but those bifacials, you're going from 4 millimetres down to 2 millimetres and 2 millimetres on both sides. So it's not an application that is suitable for that. We've looked at pyrolysis, and there is some guys in the world that are doing some great work on pyrolysis, but it is new, it has struggles with throughput, and we're still not sold that that's the best solution. So we are working with a number of academic institutions to try and develop the best solution. Something that whether it can fit all types of panels is to be determined, or whether we need to have different types of technologies for different panels is still to be determined. So what does this all matter, I guess, to everyone out in society? And the component is that we cannot continue with less than best recycling practices of e-waste and solar panels. So in January this year, there were significant changes and updates to the International Basel Convention, and now it limits the international movement of hazardous materials, with end-of-life solar panels coming into that, and also e-waste. Australia now has significant responsibility to actively prevent harm to the environment, the human health, ensuring transport, disposal, recovery of materials like obsolete solar panels. And this means a welcome to enter under unethical solar panel recycling practices here in Australia. So to bring this closer to home, the Australian government has been working on a scheme to manage end-of-life solar panels. We suspect that all states will soon implement a ban on sending solar panels to landfill, and we welcome that, as well as e-waste. Ensuring panels are recycled onshore and makes us responsible for the sustainable end-of-life management, and it supports Australia's commitment to environmental stewardship. We're actively working with both federal and state governments and to inform the legislation that support that Basel Convention implementation. And a scheme to support all players in the industry, including our customers, councils, has been drafted, and it sees a levy placed on all solar panel sales in Australia, which will then go into facilitating recycling and transport of solar panels back to for the best outcome. So what are the challenges with solar panel recycling? I went through some of the technical aspects, but for recycling of solar panels and e-waste, however, the major challenges are as a result of primarily our expanse. So to give you an understanding, freight is by far our most significant cost, with it being 40% in our recycling operations, and that is to get the feedstock to us and then supplying the materials to our end customers. So we've got this facility that's in Parkes. It's quite a central location. We need to get the materials there. And so we're going to need to manage that. We have to have places, different sites, and then with that, if we could have a capability at all these different locations, that would reduce the freight, but then we still have to deal with getting the materials to our end customers. And with that, local manufacturing in Australia, it's quite limited with the offtakes of these materials. To give you an idea, 95% of scrap aluminium is exported and for reuse. So the other component for solar panels is glass. 65% of the solar panel is glass, and recently Australia's only flat glass producer closed down, which we began engagement with, and we're really disappointed to see that leave Australian capability. So this highlights our need for international material solutions, whilst efforts are also placed into rebuilding local manufacturing. The challenges are real, but the opportunities are great when handled professionally. We need to all come together to bring the focus away from singular linear issues into a more holistic view of circularity for e-waste. It's time that we drive change. It's time to act to take a sector view. We are constantly enhancing our capabilities, installing new capital equipment to process all types of solar panels and increasing our operational capacity. What's more, we have an active advocacy arm at Circle, which is responsible for government, industry and stakeholder engagement. Our industry engagement efforts focus on these three key principles, and that is electronic e-waste. It should be treated as its own discrete category, no longer rolled up in just waste. It's end-of-life electronics. They contain the largest range of materials by far of any waste stream. There's more than 30 elements in your phone in particular. And so that's why it's important that those materials can, and they should, be returned back into the circular economy. The recycling of solar panels, it should be supported by a new scheme and drives the best-in-class outcomes for all. And we should see that a nationally consistent legislation for e-waste management and solar is provide a consistent operating framework nationally, ensuring that there's accreditation advocacy to ensure the minimum objectives and standards for e-waste treatment and diversion of landfill. We need to look at an e-waste to e-resources strategic pathway that considers the whole problem and looks at identifying the barriers, the action plans to address them, to enable a truly circular economy with previous resources locked up in e-waste being liberated and directed back into manufacturing. End-of-life electronics and solar panels, they're not waste, they're huge opportunities. And the technology for processing, it does exist. There is still work to be done, but we know that with the support of government, this is the type of thing that they should be looking to fund and driving the innovation in. Sorry. I want to just take a step back looking at e-waste, and in particular the amounts that are produced per year. So a UN report states 62 million tonnes were produced in 2022. And our report shows that about 13% of WEEE is copper. So about 8 million tonnes of copper was produced in 2022 and likely been sent to landfill. So with the copper price at about $10,000 USD per tonne, that's a potential of $80 billion per year. And with virgin mining, there was about 20 million tonnes produced in 2022, so that's 38% that's likely going through to landfill. So it's time to act on this. It's time to do better. Thank you.
And maybe if we can open to the floor for any questions.
Thank you. William Abbey from UNSW. I think I remember reading that if the entire world was to meet their solar energy targets by 2030, it would require over 100% of the silver production that we make each year. So I'm wondering if, from your experience in that disassembly process, is there something that you guys have identified that could be done in the design phase that would make that recovery easier for your processes?
Yeah, that's a good question. What can be done on the front end to make it easier to recycle solar panels, but it goes across all e-waste as well. And the thing to remember is solar panels, they're trying to get them to last 30 years out in the environment. And so with that, they're making them as robust as possible so that they can achieve that. And so that does make it quite difficult when you're pulling them apart at the end. Processes like our Parks capability, that really allows us to get 99.9% of that silver back, but that is only from a fraction of the panels. For the other broken and bifacials, there's still work to be done, absolutely. Thanks.
Darren Schaefer, Armidale Regional Council. A fraction of the panels. What percentage of the panels that are coming in to Circle would be complete, I'll say, and what percentage would be damaged? So,
yeah, that's another good one. So at least 50% are in good condition, but we're seeing, we just had a number of panels come from councils not too far from here, which were, I think it was about 80% were intact. So I think that was potentially Port Macquarie. And so, yeah, there's huge amounts that were still intact. What you'll find with solar panels is when they meet their end of life, they might have like a burn through. It's not necessarily that they've been cracked because they're usually on roofs. If they're cracked, it's when they've been thrown off. Yeah, thanks.
Question.
Hi, thanks Alex for your presentation. Rebecca, Blue Mountains Council. Just further to that question in regards to intact panels, you mentioned 90% recovery. With the ones that are damaged, what sort of recovery rate are you getting from them?
Yeah, it's a fair bit lower, and the reason it's also reduced recycling rate. So with that, we're looking at about 70%. But what that also entails is downcycling, and that's what we want to avoid. With the monofacial panels, the glass, it's in a really great condition that can go back into providing new glass products such as glass, windows, doors, window frame, windows, solar panels, whatever that might be. But through the shred and screen process, then what comes out of that is usually like if it's just going through the smelter, then it's a slag, or whether it's road base. Yeah, so we look at, there is still a diversion from landfill, but it's not complete recycling outcomes. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. So our next speaker will talk to the topic of vapes. And as probably most of you know, they've actually been banned or they're illegal in Australia. But obviously, there's a significant amount of legacy product still coming through the network system, and I guess the challenge is who pays for the collection and processing of the material. But let me introduce to you Shannon Mead, who's the Executive Director of No More Butts.
Thanks, Spiro. Great to be here, and actually great to see so many faces still semi-asleep on the afternoon of the last day after a big night. So thank you for your time. Just wanted to quickly talk you through what we do, what we have been doing. So firstly, we are environmental charity. We're volunteer run. We do programmatic-based stuff, but essentially think of us as a dot connector. So if in our remit of tobacco waste we see an issue, we work with all parties, peak bodies, other NGOs to kind of solve that issue or try to solve that issue. Specifically, what have we been up to? We've been looking at our litter prevention strategy, so working with the EPA as a grant recipient to actually build out that tobacco waste strategy across New South Wales. So if there are any councils in the room that want to look and see what that does look like in the next 3 to 5 years, please feel free to reach out. We also spend some time advocating on the removal of plastic filters from cigarettes, the most littered item in the world. We're also engaged heavily with the Global Plastics Treaty discussions, and we've launched our Bucks for Butts, which is sort of an impact program. We already collect cigarette butts. Now your donation will basically help fund that. But mainly wanting to talk around vaping. So I guess we'll talk you through the journey of vaping and then talk about the solutions for vapes and how that potentially links in with the policy and the legislation. I'll skip through a lot of this stuff because it's more about the details, but all of these slides are available in the download section on our website anyway, so you've got them. But basically, these are all the theories around what happened with legislation around vapes in itself. So they were banned. Firstly, disposables were banned, and then any non-therapeutic vape was banned to be imported. But then resellers were able to still continue to sell to obviously over 18s, regardless of nicotine content. It was a bit of an amnesty. And then what happened was that stopped also. And then there was this moment in time for 3 months, July last year, where it became that you could only purchase a vape from a pharmacy with a prescription. That lasted 3 months and was rolled back. And basically now anyone over 18 can go into a pharmacy, get a mint, menthol or tobacco flavoured vape without a prescription. If you're under 18, you need a prescription. If you're in WA, you need a prescription because they passed extra laws. So that's what's happening. Everyone keeps saying, you know, can you get vapes? Of course you can get vapes. I find them all the time. There's still vape stores. Well, technically, no, they're tobacconists, but yes, of course, they still have vapes. A lot of organised crime involved with that stuff as well. So some of the policing comes down to environmental health departments, but ultimately it's actually going to be a major crimes sort of unit somewhere in behind the scenes. And the big question is, has actually anything changed? Has anyone stopped seeing vapes exploding in bins, trucks and facilities? And the answer is no. Has anyone stopped seeing vapes being littered on the ground and packets littered on the ground? And the answer is no. I won't talk too much of this because you're in the room because you know it's an issue. We're talking about the actual amount of fires in them, talking about the batteries in them. I think that's been covered, you know, throughout this week quite comprehensively, which is fantastic that it's getting the profile that it deserves. And, you know, I remember talking about the MRF has been mentioned a couple of times. I think they're saying, well, the fire investigator basically stood over and said, well, we can't conclusively see, but that's a vape because there's plastic there and it's an embedded battery in such a small device. And the Cairns, I'm up from Cairns, and speaking with the team there, it was basically the same response as like, well, the report will say a lithium-ion battery, but we're pretty convinced it was vape. We know all that. We've heard that there's 10 to 12,000 fires each year in trucks and waste facilities. We've seen the photos and all that sort of stuff. So we know why there's an issue. Also wanted to focus on where you can vape. And this isn't a health seminar, but a lot of people from council are linked in also to enforcement teams. It's important to actually understand where you can, because where you can vape creates the litter and the waste issues. So it's always important to connect those situations. So basically think of everywhere you can't smoke, you can't vape. There's none of this, but except in this situation. So pretty much all enclosed public places, all outdoor public places under that list, which are listed as smoke-free or historically been listed as smoke-free, are also vape-free. And that's the law. And these are also ways that you can actually get resources. So if you go back and outside your health department, it's only got no smoking, and you want to update that to a sign that says no smoking, no vaping, or includes vaping. All of those catalogues are available by scanning that QR code, and if your cameras aren't quick enough, as mentioned, it's on our website. The whole deck is. Quickly, what are outdoor public places? These are the places where you can't smoke and therefore you can't vape. 10 metres of a children's playground, public swimming pools, spectator areas at sports grounds. But I think about where people do vape, and that is on buses. Unfortunately, that is on planes, that is in stadiums, that is in nightclubs, where they can actually quickly get away with a puff of that vape. So when we talk about collection schemes, and I really want to work with the EPA with this, it's actually not about just making it available at a local transfer station. You've got to go to where the issue is, because this is where places are being confiscated because they shouldn't be there. They're confiscated en masse, and they're actually accumulating in a lot, which creates stockpiling issues. If you want to report non-compliance with anything to do with illegally selling vapes, to smoking in non-smoking areas and those sort of things, again, that's a QR code that takes you to the government website where you can specifically make those recommendations or those suggestions there. And then what happens if someone litters a vape? And I don't mean what happens to the environment. That's certainly not good. Just a little bit slow. But basically there's offences under that which fall under the Protection Act. Okay, there we go. Protection Environmental Organisations Act. So it's a primary piece of legislation there. It is considered dangerous littering. That was updated last year, which is fantastic because Queensland went first and New South Wales saw that and followed. So basically if you litter a vape, it is considered a dangerous item because of the nicotine juice, but also because of the hazardous components in the batteries and the chemistry from there. And essentially what that actually means is that there's a $1,000 fine. So if you see someone litter a vape, you're actually able to enforce that by requesting the removal of that and or further enforcement of that. Now, we're not saying enforcement's the number one thing we should always lead with. We lead with education, awareness, infrastructure and so on. But in a case where that's been in place and it's been repeatedly advertised and it's still not there, it's a revenue-making opportunity as well. So we're talking about the cost that this actually creates. Well, there's a revenue-making opportunity in there. And so those authorised officers basically are defined by the Act, and most of you will know, but local enforcement officer law from councils will generally have this in their remit and have the ability to do that. And I've sort of listed who some of those authorised officers are. So that's sort of the where you should, where you shouldn't vape, what can you do if you find someone is vaping or selling vapes, is there signage and so on. That's sort of a bit of the background of the logistics, so that's what's happening with vaping itself. Bigger question is, what can I do with my used vape? Where do I throw that? And I always sort of lead with, should they go in the bin? And of course, we all know the answer is no. And I've joked there that if you're in WA, of course you should, because they introduced zero e-waste to landfill ban, and I asked specifically, are vapes considered e-waste? No, they're absolutely not. They should continue to go into landfill. But how do they get to landfill? Landfill might be the way that they end up, but they shouldn't be going through waste management streams and recycling streams in order to get to landfill. So there's a bit of clarity or lack of clarity across the different states around their response to that. And in Victoria, of course, they do have zero e-waste to landfill ban, and vapes are included in that, which is fantastic, but they don't have a scheme in place to actually recycle or recover your vape. But then, of course, stockpiling batteries is also illegal. So there is really a need for a state or a national scheme, and they've obviously got some solutions, some commercial solutions are available at a cost. And the question is, what do those costs, or who should actually be paying for those costs? So if we look at what exists, we've got Recycle Smart that does their curbside collection, and a mixed bag or a vape bag actually is included in that. So if you're part of that group, then you can actually tap into that, whether that's your council or you're an individual subscriber, confirm with them. But as of last check last month, yes, they're still accepting vapes in that. So you've got that option. City of Sydney has one of the first councils to offer a vape collection, and obviously we've got the 21 new sites, the CRCs, which is fantastic, and we'd love to see that expanded further. But to be very clear, there is no statewide, let alone a national, collection service for used vapes. So we want to consider the future solutions, and I guess how does that fall with the New South Wales legislation? So obviously, fantastic news coming out of New South Wales, and fantastic leadership by the EPA and by the minister. It was a little disappointing to see the outcome of the EMM, which essentially that motion to take action on a national level was not passed, but very quick action the same day and very quickly after by Minister Sharp to say, well, New South Wales will go regardless. And setting up a model which can then be replicated is also great leadership, but it is disappointing because we should be talking about a national scheme, not state schemes. So we've obviously got this bill, which is fantastic. The one thing I really want to call out, and I've said this through to the EPA and I've said this to those in the industry, is we're talking about no freeloaders, we're talking about regulating, we're talking about levying. That is fantastic. But how do you do that when the product's illegal? Who is going to pay for that? So is the Duracell going to pay for the vape that came in illegally in someone's suitcase from China? The answer is no. So who is going to pay for that? So it's either going to come through from your rate payment, through your tax payments, or via some funding from EPA, which ultimately, at the end of the day, comes from those sources as well. So I really want to understand how that's going to be approached. So we need the national scheme. It needs to be accessible in all jurisdictions. It needs to be tamper-proof, flame retardant. Seen some fantastic things from EcoCycle which actually go towards that, but we need to look at the costs then from there. We also need to consider the sensitivities of those that are vaping. We're talking about an illegal product now. It's not illegal to possess, but it's illegal to basically have. You're not allowed to sell it at a retailer, and if you're under 18, you're not supposed to be doing it. There's no penalty in place for that, but we want to make sure that they know where they'd go to dispose of that effectively. So is that in supermarkets alongside the bin? Does the bin get an expansion which actually then starts to accept also these forms of waste? But we need to make sure that there's zero judgment, because as soon as you start judging, then people will throw it in the bin because they don't want to actually be judged. So yeah, we're seeing people put their vapes in a sock and throwing it into the garbage bin at home so that mum and dad don't know, and that's ultimately what ends up into the bins, getting compressed, creating the fires. And as mentioned, world of illegal and illicit products, someone needs to pay. So what could that look like? We've had, and Spira will notice one of the logos on here. I'm not by any means suggesting that Mobile Muster starts collecting vapes, but what I'm saying is we've got some fantastic product stewardship programs which have already been in place, which have been established and set the ways forward that we could replicate, if not augment. The Return Unwanted Medicine scheme, which exists in pharmacies, is there an option to plug into that? Because now the only place you can legally buy a vape is from a pharmacy. You've got Mobile Muster, obviously, has gone through that before. Have they got learnings and a network that we could tap into? B-Cycle, and spoken many times with Libby, she'd love to see that being incorporated as part of that remit. But again, the question comes is who is going to fund that, because the industry cannot. And we've also then got the NTCRS. Now, their scope basically for their SEEE, the small electrical and electronic equipment, is anything that can be charged or plugs in is in scope, except vapes. And that, to me, doesn't make any sense. So if it doesn't fall into NTCRS, it's got to then fall into either a mandatory scheme based off building out the voluntary scheme or somewhere else. And then how can we fund that? So we're talking about the money there. You've potentially got levying legitimate vaping purchases. I don't know if someone would want to do that, but basically throwing an extra $5 or $10 on the legitimate purpose so that you can actually offset the cost of the illegal items. You've also got penalties from intercepted devices, so it's illegal, so there's penalties being created. That's largely being directed into Border Force at the moment, but surely a percentage of that to actually save would be far more important. You've also got duties and tax on tobacco. That's being reduced because you've got illicit tobacco there, so actually the available budget's gone from 16.6 billion down to about 8.4 and going down. So you've got less and less money that you could tap into. Then there's a federal government investment, which I'll run through in a second, but I really want to stress the cost of inaction is far greater than any of that cost. The first time that there's a human life lost as a result of a vape battery exploding in the back of a truck or in a facility will be too late. And already the actual financial cost to the industry has been too much. So if you're in this room today and want to get involved, consider communicating with your ratepayers. So not to put your vape in the bin, but please have an alternative. What do you do with it? Because otherwise it's going to lead to some confusion. If you're already part of Recycle Smart, dial up the communications and make people know that there is vapes. If you do accept vapes into e-waste, let everyone know via a newsletter. If you are a CRC, let everyone know that you are accepting vapes. If you don't, start investigating what that could look like. Talk to EcoCycle, talk to the different options that you've actually got in the market that offer a commercial solution, and demand action on a state and a national action level. I think the state here is very good again, but there still needs to be more to be done, especially specifically for vapes. And if we actually look at the opportunities behind that, the writing's very small, but the money is very big. So there's around about $20-something million, which was allocated in the federal budget in November last year to tackle specifically this issue, and not a single cent of that has actually gone out yet. So we put in a budget submission specifically for these actions. The funding was allocated, but vaping's tricky because it's actually managed by health, not environment. So the funding is sitting with Treasury to be administered by health for a response to an environmental issue. So again, those in the room who actually have some clout, have some contacts, let's start talking about this. The funding is available. So before I said ratepayers shouldn't have to pay it, there is funding here in the budget. How do we actually make that happen? How do we make sure that the New South Wales scheme, the policy when it's implemented, can actually be funded from the federal money there? So in summary, we've been talking about this for 4 years. I think 3 years ago in this conference, I talked about this issue and the fact that it was a threat and coming through. The fact we're now sitting here and there has been action in the last few months, it's fantastic, but it's been very slow. Pharmacy-only sales model kind of creates an opportunity to actually have a recycling model there, but we can't forget the illicit vapes and how do we respond to that. NTCRS or B-Cycle are really good viable options to make that happen, and again, that funding is available, but remember the cost of inaction is going to be greater than the cost of that anyway. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening in as I talk about vapes and butts and all the worlds of tobacco waste. Scan us and learn more there. Thank you.
And maybe we can take a couple of questions from the floor if anyone's got any questions for Shannon.
Hi, really interesting presentation. Patricia Chamberlain from Blacktown Council. I was just wondering if there was a precedent for charging a levy on medical products.
Not that I'm aware of. So I guess it depends on your definition of a vape. If you're talking about a prescription-based smoking cessation available via a pharmacy, then I suppose that's a different question around that.
Okay.
So I think, and you use the right term of medical device, because that's why it was excluded from the NTCRS consultation, because they said it's out of scope because it's a medical device. But I guess the question would be, if it's out of scope of one thing, then that should make it in scope for the other.
Yeah.
But as far as specifically, is there a precedent? I'm not across that. It's something I could look into. It's a question worth asking. I think more importantly is, do pharmacists want to be a collection hub? Do they want to assume that risk? And be involved in the logistics of that. But I think that's that's a low-hanging fruit that the conversation should at least start, because we're talking about a legal pathway for a legal product with a funding mechanism potentially available.
Yeah, medical pathway sounds great. Thank you.
No worries.
I was just wondering about the number of illegal stores that are coming up and selling illegal tobacco and vape products. In our area, it seems to be that if a fine is given to one of these stores, they're back open in 2 hours, and the fine doesn't pay for the amount of material that they're selling. Is there anything being done from a regulatory point of view from that perspective to close these stores down?
Yeah, I think that would more likely fall into sort of organised crime type areas. So you've got different responsibilities of federal police, state police and environmental health that kind of have season report type powers, but ultimately it probably falls well outside our pay grade as far as like what's the driver of that. But you are absolutely right, and the increase of illicit tobacco has created an issue there. So everyone, yeah, cool, they took the vape signs off the actual wall, but you can still go and buy that at a certain time from that shop, because you see all the cars that all of a sudden drive up, the door closes, and then it comes out smelling like that cherry again. So it happens, I think, and that's the whole point of We can't close our eyes and say regulation on vape sales has actually solved the problem when it comes to battery disposal or vape disposal. The issue will still exist, and we can't wait for that federal legislation to take its time to be enforced. We still need to act because batteries are still being put in the bin daily. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. And our final speaker, Dr. Safras Ali Kiani, a lecturer with the Queensland University of Technology, and his project's focusing on the recycling of automotive parts, specifically in finding innovative solutions for reducing plastic waste within the industry.
Thank you, and hello everyone. So I'm very well aware of the timing, so I'll be quick but highlight the important aspects of the research that we have done at QUT. Acknowledgements to the ARC, Australian Research Council, Motor Trades Association of Australia, also to Carcraft Group, who've been great support throughout this project. Now, very quickly, there are about 1.4 billion end-of-life vehicles in the world. In Australia, about 1.4 million. And we've got about 160,000 tons of car plastics, right? And out of this 160,000 tons of car plastic, almost 90% is being sent to the landfill. Now, across the globe, there are some directives there. EU started with ELV, end-of-life vehicle directive, in 2000, asking everyone to recycle the car 95% by 2015. And after 2015, they'll be doing all right. Also, the other countries. But in Australia, there's no direct ELV. I'll talk more about that. But quickly, this is the car recycling process. Many of you maybe are aware of that. There's depollution done, dismantling, shredding, post-shredder technology. So up until the post-shredder technology, this is where we lack for the non-metal parts of cars. So metal recycling is doing all right, and then the recycling. Now with the directives all across the globe, the fonts are smaller. Please only focus on the red ones here. I'll make it this simple for you. Now if we look at the legislation, we see Europe is doing it. Japan, there's a legislation. Australia, only related laws. Same with US. Now vehicle collection, authorized vehicle collections being done in those parts of the world. But with us, we've also got backyard boys, who we call it as unauthorized wreckers and collectors. So that's a problem there. Then with the treatment and facilities and the technology, the Europeans, Japanese, even China is doing pretty awesome job there. But with us, we have voluntary schemes and stewardship, as we've talked about. Recycling with the plastics is done in those parts, not with us. And market for second-hand products. So still underdeveloped here in Australia. Now looking at the car, approximately 100 kilograms on average are car plastics out of 1,000 kilograms of end-of-life vehicle. Now if we compare Australia and Belgium, and there are two studies that did that. Why Belgium? Because like Australia, they don't manufacture cars there, so they import vehicles. So with Belgium market, they're pretty much doing all the recycling of all the metals and plastics, whereas us, no recycling for the car plastics. This sums up to 90% material recycling in Belgium, whereas 71 with us. Energy recovery is none. And the automotive shredder residue, which is car fluff, only 5.6% there, and we've got about 28% here. This sums up to 6% of the total plastic waste this country generates. Now we did from this research, there were two studies done. Part one was the exploratory study. All right, what are the barriers? What are the enablers? What are the key factors that we can find out to make this industry work and sustainable? Now, with this study, simple methodology was qualitative surveys done with 42 stakeholders. Some softwares was used, about 250,000 words of transcripts in total, and then it was analyzed. Who were the stakeholders? There were 3 groups: car wreckers and panel beaters. It was one. The other group was decision makers, local councils, federal government, stewardship schemes, and industry associations. And then group number 3 was the opinion leaders. So they were the plastic recyclers, chemistry professors, and opinion leaders from the recycling industry. So answer in brief and short, regulation hands down appeared to be the top enabler that can enable this industry to flourish, the recycling, sustainable car industry. And then it was technology, new technology potential. So if you can see here, 40 out of 42 respondents said that with the regulations in place, we see this industry emerging as a proper recycling industry in Australia. Also, we saw some interplay between the international versus national enablers. So in simple words, if there's an international policy going on, say for example, international directive of European directives of recycling, it trickles down to Australia. More so when we saw the national sword operation by China, when they put their foot down and said no more waste from these countries back into Indonesia, China, and elsewhere, that is when we really saw this problem emerging. That is when 2020 onwards, we saw most of these bumper bars going into our landfill here. Moving on to potential future enablers. So that is the end part of study 1, where we focused on potential enablers. What are those policies? So there were some ELV directive, a lot of talk about a formal end-of-life vehicle directives, and thanks to all of you set the stage on the ELV directives and formal policies, and then car stewardship schemes. So with the end of this study, we zoomed into what key policies will make this work. Now, conjoint experiment was study 2, where we zoomed in to those policies and saw some of the action results. This was first the review of global and Australian policies, and then we shortlist 3 key policies, and then we make an experiment design. Now, in simple words, the key 3 policies were extended producer responsibility, meaning we put the responsibility onto the importer, since we don't manufacture this car as such. So putting the responsibility onto the importers, recycling fee, and export ban. Not just these 3 policies, but also the levels of these policies are mentioned on your right side. So low, high, and for export ban, it was also moderate. So low export ban means allow export for any type of car plastic. We can still send them abroad. Moderate allows some export of plastic, say for example, recycled polymers, but not the others. And high means does not allow any kind of export. So with the stakeholders, there were more. 12 profiles of different patterns were shown to the stakeholders. This is how the survey design looked. Export ban. So this was a practice scenario asking, if you imagine this scenario, there's no extended producer responsibility on car manufacturers. Consumers are exempt from a recycling fee on vehicle registration, and there is strict export ban. How would you feel? So for you to answer, under these conditions, what percentage of automotive plastics would be processed and reused in Australia in the next 10 years? So depending on the percentage for all those stakeholders and more, we found out that, and this was another scenario, so 12 scenarios were given. These are the 12 scenarios. In short, 2 scenarios stood out. These 2 scenarios focused on strict export bans and strict regulations overall, and a bit of moderate in one scenario. So with this scenario, there's highly likely that recycling efficiency for car plastics would be higher than with the other scenarios. Ranking of the attributes, extended producers was top of the list, export ban, and followed by recycling fee on the regulations. There were, of course, many barriers, high transportation cost, limited technology, and everything. But with barriers, as we know, there comes possibilities. Now, some of the myths and possibilities that I like to share, and maybe pop some of the myths here. First, 4 years ago when we started this journey, we thought there's no recycling machinery manufacturer here in Australia, so all we have to import from elsewhere. But later we found out that there are more than 4 machine manufacturers here who are absolutely making products that can do bumper bar recycling and hard to recycle plastic. One of them is Telford Smith Engineering in Melbourne. It's 100 years in operations. Then second myth was that all the recycle or majority of the car recyclers or plastic recyclers that we went to, they were skeptical in putting a dirty bumper bar into their machinery. Because it has dirt, oils, metals, and whatnot. But lo and behold, we found 2 recyclers who are just doing bumper bars recycling. One is GT Recycling, based of Geelong, and they're making PP pellets from the bumper bars, and the other ones is JK Plastic, predominantly doing just the bumper bars, meaning there is a demand, there's a potential in this industry. And then when everyone is again skeptical about the entrepreneurial action in this industry and what can we do with a dirty bumper bar, all that, there's not enough entrepreneurial action, then we found out Rebecca Haley running Boxhead Plastics and making golf tees and coasters from bumper bars. Not just that, there are other possibilities with Garden City Plastics who are giving plastic pots to Bunnings made up of recycled. 50% is recycled from car plastics. So these are some of the potentials and possibilities. And then today, Ben and I were talking, Ben was discussing about a guy in US making all these road barriers from recycled plastics, and another person based of Brisbane is exporting those plastics to them. So the opportunities in construction industry, housing are enormous. Lastly, the way forward is to look at government grants. There's millions of dollars around the modernization funds. We've looked at sustainable loans from banks who are focusing on, if you want to start something around recycling or hard to recycle plastic venture, there are sustainable loans on that. Product stewardship scheme, and we are firm believers that everyone has to work together, industry, researchers, and innovative entrepreneurs to be able to self-sustain the automotive recycling industry. That would be all, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A couple of minutes for questions from the floor.
There's in certain states there's I guess levy exemptions for recycled materials that come out of these sorts of facilities, and the flock that goes into landfill. Is that also an inhibitor to obviously the recycling of the product?
So do you mean levies for waste levies for? Yeah. So with the waste levies, I mean, car is a complicated product, right? We heard about vapes or batteries. They're just one product. But with a car, there is metal. There are different types of materials, right? Tire stewardship scheme is separate as we look at that. Batteries come under battery stewardship program. So there is waste levy with bumper bars, but not fully implemented as far as I can say. So some of the local councils are firm with the levies, and J.J. Richards and other companies who go to the repairer or a wrecker and take away their bumper bars. They charge levies, but some of the regional areas, I should not name the areas, but some are relaxed in terms of what they pay as a levy, if I understand your question right.
automotive shredder flock residue is a nasty stuff. Any future reprocessing or recycle is feasible and economically feasible.
And sorry, can you say that again? The future?
Any processing of automotive shredder flock, is it feasible? What are the your current state that you've described in your slides? All going to landfill, but what can we do about it? Is there anything, any feasibility, any capability we have already in Australia?
That's a good question. We are, so at the moment, only say 1% or 2% of the action is what we have seen. Micro level enterprises or social entrepreneurs who've just started working in this space. I was at a conference exactly 1 year ago, and these slides were not there. So it was just the problem. But in 365 days, some action has started to take place. And also, we are working closely with Carcraft Group and Motor Trades Association to be able to find some solution to that. It's a matter of working together, as I said, in the final action. So to sum it up, no, nothing is being done just yet, but hopefully.
Thank you. I guess we'd like to think that these are emerging issues, but they're challenges we've been facing for quite some time as an industry. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers this afternoon. Thank you to everyone that's